Hello everybody and welcome back to another 2022 Overwatch League roster breakdown video. We are reaching the end of these roster breakdowns. We have 3 remaining, and that starts today with the London Spitfire. Now, of course, historically the London Spitfire had a very good time in the Overwatch League. They were the team to win the Overwatch League in 2018, but ever since they've never been able to, of course, match that. They've had some major roster shakeups, of course, starting with a full Korean roster, and then now last season and this season, they have a fully European roster. So, let's pull up their roster and take a look at who they have on this team that finished the 2021 season with a 1-15 record, minus 35 differential. So, here we can see, from top to bottom, the DPS lay have Sparker, Shax, and new addition Backbone. He joins this team as a new piece. In the support line, they have 2 new pieces, Provide and Admiral. And then in the tank line, they have Hottie, who is returning, and they have Poco, who is, of course, their off-tank veteran guy coming over from the Philadelphia Fusion. They also have a very big change in their coaching staff, with Christopher being the new head coach for this team, also formerly for a coach for the Philadelphia Fusion. So, some big moves by this Spitfire team to create a new roster. Obviously, last season they were not very good, so what can they do this season to improve? What can they do to be better in 2022? Let's talk about that. So let's start with their DPS line, which last season was arguably the strength of this roster. The part that was pretty far and away the best piece on the roster. And we, of course, have a Sparker, who was the main player that everybody was excited for on this team last season. He couldn't play the first half of the season because he was too young, but he is their primary hit scan player, so he's going to be the Widowmaker, the Ashe for this team. Plays some Cassidy, plays some Hanzo. And he was paired pretty much throughout the second half of the season with Shax, who also plays some hit scan, plays some of that Widow, some of that Cassidy. But he's mostly known for his Tracer. That's really what he has been the best at. He's also got a pretty good Reaper, decent Hanzo as well, so these two really are the two that I think will be the most, they're going to start the most, they're going to play the most, because the two of them have been, historically, pretty good players in the Overwatch League. Shax, of course, started out in the LA Valiant, came over to this London Spitfire roster after the Valiant, fiasco of 2021, where they completely redid their roster and made it an entirely Chinese roster. So, Shax is a very good player, and he is somebody who has impressed me a lot in the Overwatch League. One of those DPS players who I think has had a pretty strong showing. He's one of those Western Tracer players that has looked very good, has been pretty consistently strong. And when these two really got going last season, they were kind of the part of this roster that actually stood out and really contributed and looked to be the best part of this roster pretty consistently anytime they played. So I'm excited to see what these two do. Now that they have a third piece, I would say that there were 4 of them on the team last season, but now they have Backbone, who comes in as the primary and really the only flex DPS player on this team. So he plays stuff like Hanzo and Pharah and Genji and Echo, and Doomfist. Those are the types of heroes that you're going to see come out of Backbone, though, based on some of the potential leaks. We will potentially not be seeing Doomfist in that DPS role, so I guess we'll have to see what happens. So, Backbone brings this kind of DPS line together to be that flex DPS player. I don't know how much we'll see of it with the way that I think Sparker and Shax played last season. I think they're going to try to play the two of them as much as possible. But obviously, in the event that they need one of those flex DPS heroes, if Echo's really meta or Genji's really meta or something like that, we're going to probably see a lot of backbone. At that point, then it comes down to what do you need in your second player. Do you need a hit scan, like specifically like Sparker, or do you need a Tracer? In that case, you probably see Shax. So I do like this DPS line. I think it's the best part of this roster. In my opinion, it is really the best part of this roster, just based on what we saw from them last season, right? I think that they're going to be the strongest part from this roster. They've had the most success in the Overwatch League together, this unit. I think there's definitely some chances for other really strong parts in other parts of the roster, but to me it really is Sparker and Shax are going to lead the way for this roster, and they are going to be really one of the big parts that kind of determines how good this roster is. As we move on to the next part of this roster, we have the supports. The first one is Provide. Of course, Provide is a very controversial player because of some of his history with things that he has said in the past I don't remember exactly what things he said specifically, but I do know there were kind of racially insensitive things that he has said in the past. It's definitely a signing that has been very criticized over time, but it's something where a lot of people have said, look, he has changed, we're giving him a chance. Obviously, he's on a shorter leash. If he, does something that is bad, we're going to boot him and kick him out and get rid of him. And so it's going to be interesting to see how they handle the Provide kind of situation. And my hope is that Provide, he's 23, and this stuff didn't happen that long ago. So that's what does concern me, is that he was saying stuff not too long in the past. But I'm hopeful that Provide has learned and Provide has grown and Provide has changed as a person and isn't going to be saying and doing some of these things that he's done in the past. But we'll see what happens for him. But from everything I know about Provide, he's a very mechanically gifted and mechanically talented player who really is one of those kind of players who just has the mechanics that are really, really good. And so then you just kind of hope that by putting him in the team environment, he will become better and stronger, and will really it'll allow him to be more unleashed in a way that he can kind of use those talents that he has mechanically to become a much better player, right? Because he's a really good flex support player from everything we've seen. So definitely a bit of an interesting signing. Definitely one that is going to be very, very, very heavily under a microscope, because it is going to be one of those signings where you look and you say, this could go very, very wrong very, very fast, and we need to see and make sure that he is responsible and he isn't getting worse as time goes on. But we'll see what happens for him on this lineup. Paired with him, though, is Admiral, who is the first, to my knowledge, player in the Overwatch League from Estonia. That's where he comes from. And, fun fact, he is not the richest person in Estonia. I don't know if that is some type of meme about him, but there we go. That is something that, I guess there was a meme that he's the richest person in Estonia, because I think a lot of people just don't know what Estonia is. So they were like, oh, this guy must be the richest man in Estonia. But he's not. But he comes, of course, from the British Hurricane. That is where he played prior to joining the London Spitfire. And he is a pretty well-known main support in EU contenders. He's been very, very good. He was on British Hurricane when they were having some of their success. He was on the team. Should be noted, he was on this team after the majority of them, of course, went to the London Spitfire. Before that, he was on Obey Alliance, where he actually did beat the British Hurricane in the Contenders 2020 Season 2 for Europe in November of 2020. So he did beat that British Hurricane team, and then he joined British Hurricane, won 2 contenders titles, placed second in 2 more, and then got third. So he's been on some pretty good teams in European contenders, and he's a very well-known player. Brings a lot of very strong main support play to this team. And he's definitely one of the most interesting signings, because I think a lot of people thought that they would go for some other more well-known players, like someone like FD for example. Right? FD not in the league right now. And I think a lot of people thought that there was a good chance that FD would be a great fit for this London Spitfire roster. But they opted instead to bring in Admiral, who is somebody that has been in the British Hurricane, London Spitfire ecosystem, has been around, and that they had obviously been planning on bringing up for a while, to have him join this London Spitfire roster now that they have gone through a rebuild. And I think it's a major upgrade on the support line in general from what they had last season. I've never been a huge fan of Kelix. If you have been watching me long enough, if you go back to some of my old videos, you can find that I've always been very critical of Kelix. I've never been the biggest fan of Kelix. Even back to 2018, I always thought he was pretty average. So I think that having someone like Admiral is a huge upgrade, and I also think that Provide is a pretty big upgrade over Reaper. So I really think that was one of the problems with this team last season. Their support line was not good at all. And I think that was one of the reasons why we saw the tank line struggle so much last year, is because they didn't really have the support that they needed to be an elite level team to succeed at a high level. And so now I think that there is a much better, much stronger support line here that I think will be able to do a lot more for this team and be able to make this team far more competitive than they were last season. Because this, to me, is a major, major upgrade where I think this team is going to look a lot better now. Even if you have the same pieces through and through, which in a lot of cases it might be a lot of the same pieces, right? Because they have Sparker, Shax, Hottie. If they're playing, that's 3 starters from last season who are still in, and then you just have the new support line. So definitely an upgrade of the support line. I think that will help this team a lot, and they're going to look a lot better now in the 2022 season. Finally, we have the tanks for this team, which I think are very, very interesting and very good to see. Hottie, of course, joined this team in 2021. He was one of the players they brought on for 2021, coming from the British Hurricane. They then released him after the 2021 season before bringing him back for the 2022 season. So I don't have an issue with that. I think that when you looked at a lot of the players, it was really kind of like him or Ben Best. That was really the only 2 players that really were that they could have possibly gone for, because Don obviously was already on a roster. I suppose there are some other EU main tanks you could argue that would have made the roster, but I don't think any of them are as good as Hottie or Ben Best. Those are really the only 2 options they could have really added. So that's where you were looking. And I do think that Hottie is the better option because he knows this team, he knows this system. He's familiar with Shaq, and he's familiar with Sparker, and he's played with them before. So you at least have somebody who knows this team and knows the players on this roster, and at least can kind of fit in pretty well to the team. And I do think that Hottie is going to be an interesting player to watch because obviously last season he did struggle, and he struggled quite a bit. He and Molf did not have a great season in 2021. But like I said before, I think a lot of that came down to just the support line was not very good, and the support line did not support them and keep them up in the way that you would have hoped it would. It didn't really have a major and huge impact on the game, and so, or they didn't have a major impact on the game, and so it had a major impact on the team's performance because Hottie would die a lot, as would Molf, and they just didn't really get as much as they needed going. It'll be interesting now to see how Hottie performs in a solo tank environment where he is the only tank player for this team, right? If he's in the lineup. And it'll be very interesting to watch and see if Hottie is able to perform at a high level now that he is going to be getting full resources whenever he's in. Because that'll be one of the things that will determine how good a lot of the tanks are, right? We're just seeing a major seismic shift in tank play now because tanks that were very good in the past may not be very good anymore because it's solo tank. And solo tank is very, very different from double tank. And who knows how they're going to look. But I think that that allows Hadi the more ability to kind of be a focus and play to his strengths more, where it is going to be way easier for Hadi to have the support that he didn't really have last season because he is the only tank, and he is going to be the player that his team is going to be focused on playing around and supporting and keeping alive, because if they want to win team fights and win maps and matches, they need to get strong performances out of their solo tank. And so I think that's going to be a big thing that will help Hadi in the 2022 season, is that he's going to have more resources put on him than he did last season. It'll be interesting to see, though, if we see more of Hadi or if we see more of Poco, because, of course, Poco is historically one of the most popular and well-known and kind of well-loved players in Overwatch League history. Of course, playing for the Philadelphia Fusion from 2018 through 2021. He has been a very, very consistently strong player. Though the thing you could argue is that when this team was at their best, it was when Poco wasn't playing, right? 2018, they had that grand finals run where Hoppa played a lot of time, though Poco did actually play quite a bit, and then during that run as well, they kind of ran Hoppa and Poco quite a bit. And then in 2020, when they had that really good season, it was predominantly Fury. We didn't see a ton of Poco then. But I still think Poco is a very good player, and I think mechanically we've seen how talented he is, and he's still a very, very strong player. And I think that when you looked at the off-tanks on the market, Poco was obviously the #1 European off-tank. And I think there was definitely competition between London and Paris for where he would actually go to play. I talked about this in the Paris Eternal video. I'm pretty adamant that is the reason why Paris released Vestola and then brought Vestola back, because they wanted to sign Poco, and they were competing with London, and then Poco ended up signing with London because, my guess, because of the Christopher connection. He wanted to go play for somebody who he had spent a long time with in Philly, and so we wanted to go join him again, a coach that he liked working with and that he enjoyed playing with. So I think that this is a very, very, very good signing. Someone who is a veteran presence and who is going to bring a lot to this team, right? One of the problems with London Spitfire last season is, yes, they had veterans, right? Kelix has been around the league for a long time. He was on this team. He was the main support. But I don't think Kelix is an elite competitor, right? He is a veteran for sure, and he brings that veteran presence with him everywhere he goes. But I've always kind of never gotten that competitiveness and that drive from Kelix that I get when I look at Poco, or when I look at players like, Carpe or Striker, where these are players who really want to win, and they really, really, really care about their teammates, and they really care about being some of the best players in the game. And I think that is one of the things that will help this Spitfire team, is that they have a veteran leader who's been in the grand finals, who's been in playoffs before, who has been on these teams that have been super, super successful, and a coach who's been there as well with Christopher. And now you have somebody who you can say, look, I've been here, I know the ropes, I know how things work around here, let's work together, let's do this, let's go, I got us, we're going to be the best team we can be because I'm going to lead us there. And that is my goal as the kind of veteran presence for this team. And so I think the signing of Poco is an incredible signing. I think it's a very good signing. I think they got the best Western, specifically European off-tank they could have gotten in free agency. And I think that it is going to be a very, very good look for this team whenever he gets the opportunity to play. And every time he does play, I think we're going to see the best of the best for this Spitfire roster. So my thoughts on this roster really are, I think this is a major upgrade from last season, right? I don't think this is a one-win team in 2022. I think they've done way too much to improve their roster. They've done a lot to make their team a lot better. I think the bottom of the Western region is actually going to be more competitive because I look at this team and I see where they've made notable and important changes to the roster and things that they've done that I think makes this roster look a lot better. And it's going to be a stronger roster because I think that they have overall improved their coaching staff and improved the players that they have on the roster. I think it's a lot better to actually put in the work of really building a team instead of just bringing a team over, right? Like we saw the success of the Vancouver Titans and the NYXL in the early seasons where they just brought teams over. Also, we saw the Seoul Dynasty and the Dallas Fuel who did that. It didn't work very well. And we saw this London Spitfire roster who basically merged two rosters together. You know, it didn't work the way that they wanted it to originally. So that's why they ended up trimming down the roster to kind of find those best pieces from those two rosters, bring them together, and then that was the roster that they won the grand finals with. And what we saw last season was that Paris did their due diligence and pulled together a roster by bringing in players from all different parts of the European contender scene, and London Spitfire just brought over British Hurricane. And Paris was better. And I think that that's really important to understand, is that you have to really focus on finding those specific players who are very, very good and bringing all of those diamonds in the rough together when you get to the Overwatch League. Because when you have a roster that works well in European contenders, it might just be because you have one or two pieces on that team that are just so good and so dominant that the level of play and the disparity is much higher. When you go into the Overwatch League, and it's really, really, really close, and every team has the best of the best, you have to make sure that every single one of your players is a star, right? You're not going to be able to compete if you have some average players in certain areas. You're going to fall behind. And I think that's what the London Spitfire did much better this season, is that they didn't just say, we're going to bring all these players from the British Hurricane. Obviously, British Hurricane doesn't exist anymore, so they can't do that in the future. But now it's bringing together these different threads and bringing them together and starting to tie them up and figuring out what works and what doesn't work. And I think that is going to be a better team as a result. I think what we're going to see in the future now is this London Spitfire team is going to be way more competitive than they were last season. I think they're going to be pretty close to the level of the Paris Eternal for this season, because I do like the changes this roster made a lot. And I think that this roster is going to be competitive. I don't think they're at championship level. I don't think they're going to be competing at the top of the Western region. But I do think they're going to be far more competitive, and they're not just going to be, you know, a team that you can roll over every single week, right? I think they're a team that you're going to have to be aware of, and you're going to have to focus on them each week, because I do think they have the ability to be an upset team that can just scare you and come in and win kind of out of the blue. So that's my thoughts on this roster. I think this is a very good roster. Much better than we saw last season, but it's definitely still a roster I don't expect to be competing at the highest of the highs in the 2022 season. Let me know your thoughts on this London Spitfire roster in the comments down below. Do you agree with me that there's an improved roster? You think it's not really that much better, if better at all? Love to hear from you in the comments down below, but that is going to be all from me for today. Thank you all so much for watching. If you enjoyed, consider liking and subscribing for more videos like this in the future. That's going to be all from me. Hope you're all staying safe and staying healthy. And until next time, bye-bye.